On a warehouse floor, a forklift takes a sharp turn at a speed, and the machine's weight shifts outside the intended control range. Operators must not execute a sharp, sweeping turn without significantly reducing travel speed first, regardless of whether the forklift is loaded or empty. At a dirt extraction site, a loaded cement truck reverses onto a heap of sand, and the ground support conditions change in a way that affects vehicle stability. Operators must not reverse a high center load near uncompacted slopes, loose ground, or soft shoulders without a verified route and an active spotter. The concentrated pressure of the rear tires can quickly weaken loose earth, creating an elevated vehicle stability concern when the ground can no longer support the vehicle's weight in a stable and predictable way. Always walk and inspect your path before backing up. Keep heavy equipment strictly on compacted, designated ground. In a narrow warehouse aisle, a loaded forklift contacts a rack base, affecting the connected storage system and creating a clear structural stability concern. Workers must not maneuver a forklift through tight storage aisles without absolute certainty of the load's width, fork position, and ground level clearance. Contact with a critical structural upright can compromise the integrity of the racking system, turning stored materials into a meaningful rack stability concern that can affect equipment, inventory, and workers in the surrounding area. Always maintain a strict buffer zone between your equipment and structural supports. On a factory floor, a worker steps inside an automated enclosure before energy isolation is verified, creating a machinery control exposure. Workers must not enter a robotic cell or enclosed machinery zone without physically isolating the energy source and applying strict lockout-tagout protocols. Relying on an open door, a temporary pause, or an inactive moment to hold back an automated system places the worker inside an active machine control area where unplanned movement could occur because of a sensor fault, control error, or unplanned manual reset. Always shut off power at the source before crossing the threshold. Never trust an automated machine to simply remain paused while you're inside. In an outdoor repair bay, a trained mechanic demonstrates why you should never block the exhaust outlet of a running sedan. Blocking an active tailpipe with a makeshift plug creates an unsafe pressure condition. As the engine continues to run, exhaust flow can be restricted behind the blockage until it releases unpredictably past the obstruction, redirecting exhaust discharge, exhaust byproducts, and loose material into the work area near the operator's position. Always use proper diagnostic gauges to test exhaust pressure instead of improvising with shop rags. Treat every active tailpipe as a directional discharge point and keep yourself completely outside the exhaust path. Inside a storage facility, a stand-up forklift drives through a doorway with its mast raised, and the overhead frame contacts the steel structure. Operators must not travel with a forklift mast elevated, especially when navigating through doorways, aisles, or areas with overhead obstructions. Driving with a raised mast shifts the machine's center of gravity and creates a clear snag concern. When the mast contacts an unyielding overhead structure, forward momentum can turn the contact point into a pivot, creating an equipment stability concern and placing the operator in a higher risk operating area. Always drop your forks and fully retract the mast before putting the machine in motion. Know your overhead clearances and visually verify every threshold before crossing. In a narrow outdoor alleyway, a worker uses an angle grinder to cut through a metal structure, creating a clear tool control concern. Operators must not use an angle grinder without its factory-issued safety guard and a firm, two-handed grip. When an abrasive wheel binds inside a tight cut, the rotational force can cause unexpected tool movement toward the operator's workspace, reducing control and increasing the possibility of losing safe tool clearance. Always position yourself outside the direct line of the tool's movement and let the cutting wheel do the work without forcing the angle. At a work site, dismantling area, a saw cut affects the support area near a worker's position beside a trench edge, creating an avoidable elevated position concern. Workers must not support their weight on the exact structural element they are actively dismantling. When the final load-bearing connection is separated, the material can quickly lose structural integrity. turning a routine cut into an elevated position concern while the worker is still handling powered equipment. Always analyze the load path and establish a secure, independent stance on solid ground before engaging your saw. Isolate your balance from the work zone, maintain total control of your equipment, and keep your site safe. In a building lobby, workers try to guide a heavy cable reel downstairs, but the reel becomes difficult to control once its rolling momentum increases. Workers must not rely on human strength alone to manually lower a heavy cylindrical load down a stairwell without a secure mechanical winch or rigging system. A slight shift in balance can transfer control away from the crew, allowing the object's rolling momentum to exceed manual handling limits and create a meaningful contact and property impact concern. Always utilize freight elevators, certified hoists, or engineered ramps to transport massive spools across elevation changes. Respect the powerful physics of heavy rolling loads and do not rely on manual force alone to control them. At a muddy construction site, a worker pries a stubborn plank from a narrow foundation wall, and the material shifts unexpectedly during the task. Workers must not use body weight and legs as a makeshift pry bar to dislodge formwork or structural materials. When forceful, unsupported leverage is applied with the lower body, an unexpected break or shift in the material can quickly take away the worker's center of gravity, turning an unsafe shortcut into an avoidable elevated position concern. Always use the proper removal tools to separate materials while maintaining a secure, two-footed stance on solid ground. Keep yourself completely outside the active work area and remember that physical shortcuts always increase your exposure. In an outdoor parking lot, a forklift reverses without confirming the path toward a solid concrete water basin directly behind it. Operators must not operate a forklift in reverse without a guaranteed unobstructed line of sight and total awareness of the operating environment. When you back up without checking over your shoulder or verifying your clearances, you turn a large industrial vehicle into a meaningful clearance concern that can affect infrastructure and compromise the safety of the surrounding work area. Your eyes must be locked in the exact direction of travel before your foot ever hits the accelerator, so you can accurately map out stationary hazards and barriers before beginning any material handling task. At a warehouse bay, a reversing car and a loaded forklift enter the same blind threshold at the same time, creating a preventable shared path concern. Driving a loaded forklift through blind corners and shared thresholds without stopping turns a vital piece of equipment into a meaningful vehicle clearance concern. When operators fail to sound their horn and verify clear passage at intersections, they create an avoidable path control concern that can affect vehicles, property, and any pedestrians positioned within the blind spot. Inside an excavation trench, a pressurized water line discharges unexpectedly and sends water through the confined work area. Workers must not attempt to adjust, repair, or dismantle a pressurized utility line without confirming the system is completely depressurized and securely locked out. When the structural integrity of an active water main is compromised, a controlled utility can become a pressurized water release concern that may create rapid water entry and reduce safe access inside the work area. You must always verify that all pressure has been safely bled from the system and double-check lockout procedures before beginning any hands-on repairs. Every worker in a deep excavation must have a designated, unobstructed exit route mapped out in case of rapid water entry or changing ground support conditions. At a bridge construction site, a crawler crane lifts a heavy, concrete span when the setup becomes unstable under the load. Operators must not attempt a critical heavy tonnage lift without rigorously verifying the crane's load capacity, ground stability, and rigging balance. When a machine is operated outside verified lift conditions or dynamic load shifts are not fully accounted for, a large piece of heavy equipment can become an equipment stability concern that may affect infrastructure and the surrounding controlled work zone. Every critical lift requires a meticulously calculated lift plan that accounts for exact load weights, boom angles, and ground-bearing pressure before the load ever leaves the earth. Operators must constantly monitor their load moment indicators and immediately stop the operation if the machinery shows any sign of instability. On a logging site, a cutting operation releases stored tension in a leaning tree trunk, causing the timber to move with substantial stored energy force. Workers must not position themselves on the release side of a tension load, especially when cutting tension timber or managing bound trees. When a trunk carrying substantial stored energy is cut without understanding the release physics, the timber can become a stored energy concern that may move unpredictably within the release zone. Always conduct a thorough tension and compression analysis of the wood before making a single cut. If a tree is under heavy tension, utilize mechanical equipment like the grapple truck already present on this site to fully stabilize the load and relieve the pressure before a worker ever engages the saw. During a routine transport task, a hand truck meets a towering stack of unsecured beverage crates, and the stack begins to lose stability. Workers must not attempt to manually transport freestanding, unsecured stacks of heavy materials that exceed their physical control limits or the safe operating capacity of the equipment. When tall loads are not shrink-wrapped, banded, or properly secured before tilting, a simple material handling task can become a meaningful tipping concern that may affect surrounding materials, impact shipments, and place anyone in the active handling zone within the affected area. You must always secure tall stacks of crates with wrapping or heavy banding before attempting to tilt or move them with a hand truck. Limit the height of your loads to a manageable center of gravity so that the weight remains entirely within the operator's physical control. On a lift site, a forklift raises a large container while a worker is positioned on top, creating an elevated work concern that should be stopped immediately. Operators must not allow personnel to stand on forklift lifting components, elevated pallets, or hoisted materials under any circumstances. When industrial lifting equipment is treated like a personnel lifting device and a person is placed on an unsecured load, the operation creates an elevated work and clearance concern. A load shift, wind movement, or equipment movement can quickly affect balance, turning a routine lift into an unsafe elevated work setup that should be stopped immediately. Forklifts are engineered exclusively for moving materials, not people. If a worker needs to access an elevated area, you must use a certified aerial work platform, a scissor lift, or proper scaffolding equipped with approved elevated work protection.